story.
Yeah.
Like that's what me and my boyfriend were talking about. Like the whole like American Horror Story, like with the whole like gimp suit thing that they did. They had like a whole thing with that in American Horror Story. And we're like, is this like where that came from?
I mean, that scene definitely, it does make a lot of sense knowing that Wes Craven directed adult films. And apparently, according to his Wikipedia page, it says he was in the documentary called Inside Deep Throat. And there's rumors that he was involved in that movie and somehow, and like that sort of the making of that movie. But no, he says he wasn't part of it. It's interesting. And then he apparently made an actual regular movie, which was Last House on the Left. And then he just kind of decided to shift to
Horror.
horror movies. It's kind of a weird change. I don't know.
Did you
I
watch
don't
The
know. I
Serpent and the
don't think
Rainbow?
so, honestly.
Which one?
The Serpent and the Rainbow?
I have not seen that one actually.
Really?
But I feel
It's like
like
another like weird one.
you're saying that like you can't see like I guess like adult films going into horror, but I feel like that like makes the most sense to me because like horror films are always so like sexual. Are they not? Like I feel like comparatively to most other like genres.
I guess sometimes they can be.
At least the older ones feel like to me like they always like prey on that like objectification of the hot young girl,
Yeah,
which I don't
Yeah.
think Wes
torture
Craven does in
porn.
that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's certainly like you think of. I'm a big fan of slasher movies, and you know, people. It's funny. I'm wearing my Halloween shirt, but Halloween is often credited as like the first slasher, but they're ones kind of before, and those are all sexualizing like a final girl who survives the and then they have like it's funny because we're talking about Wes Craven and he made Scream, which are like movies that are slasher movies that are like meta versions where they talk
Are
about
making
the
fun
rules
of
of horror
yeah.
films, themselves, and then each of them. I think there's been 6 of the Screams now, which is crazy. He only made 4 of them, but each one that gets more progressively meta and whatever.
Well, it
But
kind of reminds me of like a book too. I'm not sure if you guys have read it, but it's kind of big on Book Talk. Is the Final Girl Support Group, which
I read that.
follows. Yeah, I don't think it was very good, but it is something that sort of follows that like whole tropey and stuff. And then with it being written by a man, always gives me like those icky vibes.
I thought the end was kind of mediocre. Honestly, I feel like it didn't
I
have a good
didn't.
payoff.
Yeah, I didn't think it was worth reading. It was. I felt so bad because my friend was like, "You have to read this. It's so good." And when I read it, I was like, "It was fine."
Yeah, I went through a period when I read that. I read a bunch of similar type of books where were there horror adjacent kind of things. I can't think of any of the other ones that I read at the moment. But I guess we can jump in and introduce you as well and get started. All right, this week on Left of the Projector, we are talking about the Wes Craven film from 1991 called The People Under the Stairs, sometimes forgotten Wes Craven movie. And this is part of the an extra addition to the spooky month. And with me to discuss it, I have Mariah and Kristen from the Literary Liberation podcast. Thank you both for coming on.
Thanks
Thank you for having us.
This is like our first
Or
official collab with like our podcast.
that's
Because like
true.
I know we
guess
did
that's right.
Barbie, but like we weren't like officially like podcasters then.
And that was just a massive amount of people.
Yeah,
I
that
can't
was a
ever do it
lot.
that many people again. No shade to any of the people on it. It was just
We never want to talk to you again. Don't ever contact Evan.
yeah. And we're just discussing how this movie is Wes Craven. It was I feel like it's a kind of a forgotten time movie within his because he has so many classic hits. He has the Nightmare on Elm Street. I think he did 2 of them. He has 4 Scream movies. He has Hills Have Eyes, Last House on the Left. But this one comes at a weird time. So I mean, Kristen, you said this was the first watch for you, and you'd seen it before, right?
Yeah.
But given this movie came out in 1991, which I feel like is kind of important to the movie and the plot, I mean, maybe you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it kind of sets the stage of kind of what America was like at this point post Reagan. We're in like the first Bush. You know, things are not going well for most people, even though the impression of most people is, oh, America's so great. And the kickoff of this movie is a bunch of people living in, you know, a housing project in Los Angeles, and they can't afford to pay their rent and they're being evicted. That's kind of like the backdrop. So I don't know what you guys thought of the any of those things or any other things.
I mean, for the first time watching it, like, I feel like I always go into, like, watching old movies and, like, you just kind of expect that there's going to be, like, some problematic themes or problematic, like, topics sort of, like, expressed, whether it's very casually, like, transphobia in, like, the early 2000s or, like, racism in, like, the early 90s and 80s and 70s and stuff like that. So I actually feel like this is a very progressive movie. Like, I watched it and I feel like I didn't see anything that was like super like problematic, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely isn't problematic given the time period, and also I feel like the themes are not. I mean, I've seen most of not every Wes Craven movie, but a lot of them, and he doesn't usually write movies like this. Is very unlike his other films. It's very. I think there was going to be another guest. I won't say their name because I'd feel bad if I get this part out. But someone referred to this one as being like written by, it's like if Mao had written this movie or something. It's like a Maoist take. And
My
I feel,
letterbox review was like, R.I.P. Mao, you would have loved the people under the stairs.
what were you going to say, Ryan? I thought I cut you off.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. We can just keep
Yeah.
rolling.
Well, one of the notes, this is like getting into later, but so there really aren't that many characters in this movie. You really only have the young boy in this whose name is
Fool.
Fool. He goes by Fool. I think his name is Poindexter.
It is, yeah.
And you have his. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it was very confusing. Well, because I had to watch this without subtitles, and I never watch anything without subtitles. And the audio mixing on this movie, I'm sorry, is horrendous. You cannot understand what they're saying half the time. And, like, I'm a very big subtitle watcher where, like, I don't know what you're saying unless there's subtitles. So with this, like, half the time I was like, I had no idea what's happening. And so, like, whenever it was like, they didn't, like, they referenced that he goes by Fool, but, like, after they'd already been calling him Fool for, like, a good, like, 30 minutes into the film. So I was like, who is this fool and why are they suddenly referring to, because they introduced him, he's like, hi, my name's Poindexter, and then like
Yeah.
5 minutes later they just start calling him Fool nonstop.
Yeah,
I was like,
they
what?
only kind of. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm done.
Oh, I was just gonna say is yeah, they only kind of reference it as like his sister is doing like tarot cards, and she always comes up with him as being the fool. And I guess that like the very first thing about this movie is you introduce them, and the quote that I wrote down is like they're telling them they're going to get evicted because they didn't pay their rent on time, and he says, "I didn't think the landlord would do this, not now." And it's like, have you met landlords?
Yeah.
The nice landlord would never let us put us on the street with our mom is sick.
It was kind of crazy because, like, apparently, like, the landlord was, like, I can't remember the other character's name, the main guy that, like,
Leroy?
Leroy, yes.
Yeah.
Whenever, he was, like, talking to Fool about, like, oh, like, since you missed your payment, you have 3 days to pay it. In those 3 days you pay it, you have to pay 3 times the rent or something to, like, catch up with it, which is, like, crazy absurd.
It's like a monopoly rule. They're like, up 3 times payment. And you passed. You landed on my
houses. I got a hotel on this property.
Yeah, I don't know. You've seen this before, right? Did you always think this movie? I don't know when the last time you watched it was. Did you always? I remember this movie, but not remember it being, kind of based. I just remember it being like a fun movie and kind of creepy, and like the people under the stairs are kind of like an afterthought to the movie. Like that's the name of the movie, but I feel like that's not really what this movie is about at all.
They don't even
I
live
think
under the
my
stairs.
so Harry Potter film. Um, but my first impressions, I was about my oldest kids, like 9 years old. I think it was I had very conservative parents, so the fact that they, looking back, that they showed me this film, which was very anti-landlord, it was very progressive for the time. Like, how old was I? Early 2000s watching this film. I like, that they're bad people and that they're doing bad things being a kid watching this. And it's weird because it's like one of those movies that you can watch as a kid because it really isn't like horribly violent or anything, but it's also a coming of age movie where he's realizing how the world works. Like you all said, with him not understanding how like a landlord could charge them 3 times the amount even though they're only 3 days late on rent. So I always really enjoy this movie, and it wasn't until like last year that my partner had not seen it, and I was like, "Oh my god, you have to watch this movie!" And I was like, "Holy shit, this is based." The whole thing going through is like one of my favorite horror movies, and it's like part of me feels as though like I should pat myself on the back for liking this movie so much as a kid. I just didn't know it at the time, but it's interesting, like knowing what we all know about late stage capitalism and gentrification and landlordism as a whole and how detrimental that is for the working class, and watching these proletariats rise up against the landlord class. It's goated. I love this shit.
Well, I'll save a little bit of this, but one thing I was going to say is that the other people in this movie. I don't know if either of you have ever seen Twin Peaks, but it has two of the
Oh, the
main
mom is in
and both
the
the mom
mother.
and the dad,
Oh,
and
I didn't know he was in it. I was just
Everett
reading her
Mc,
Wikipedia page.
and they were actually they weren't involved in Twin Peaks, but they're both Everett McGill and Wendy Robbie were both in Twin Peaks, and they're both great in this movie. I mean, they're like absolutely insane. But the thing that I was
Terrifying.
thinking about when I watched, like thinking about man and woman, aside from the fact that they don't give them names, I feel like is also indicative of them just being like this placeholder for these rich, kind of conservative leaning Reaganite era, we're just going to rise to the top. They mentioned how they had a funeral business, they bought a property, and later they mentioned they have 50 buildings in the neighborhood. I think towards
Yes.
the end, like that's a lot of property. And
Hmm.
so it just shows you how some groups of people at this time in the Reagan era were rising and gaining all the wealth. And they literally were hoarding the wealth in like a big safe in their basement. I feel like there couldn't be a better metaphor for just, you know,
Rich people in general.
yeah, just rich and then the working class.
Yeah. Well, because I know like the grandpa fools grandpa talks about like I guess I don't know if it's like supposed to be them because they end up like you find out at the end that they're brother and sister, like
Yeah.
the villains. So I guess like their parents, so they like inherited this like funeral home
Generational
business.
wealth.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's really interesting too. How like even at the end it shows them like hoarding all the wealth and stuff like that, where they don't put that money back into society, and that's virtually why their entire economy is crumbling. Is because there's no money able to be circulated because all of the money ends up going back to them.
Yeah, the kid says when he sees the big pot of money, he's like, that's why there's no money in the ghetto.
Yeah.
He's like, this is where all the money went. It's not being used to circulate it. And yeah, and he asked at some point, like, uh, what happened to all the families. He's like very, like you said, right? He's coming to understand why it is that things the way they are. He can't understand that, and I feel like Leroy is like not really very good at kind of explaining to him. He needs to actually learn through the actual experience of, you know,
Watching his
people.
friends get murdered.
Yeah, a tale where we all know well. That was a little dark.
I think Leroy was my favorite character though. He was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, Ving Rhames is great. He's in all, like, anyone who's seen any of the Mission Impossible movies, he's in every single one. I think all like 52 of them at this point. I don't know how many they have, but like a lot of them. But the whole like plot like leading up to it is they show them like the mother's dying of cancer in their apartment they're about to get evicted from. And then the first scene they show of like the mom and dad, the rich family, is like they're sitting in this super fancy living room with like a fire. He's pulling buckshot out of some kind of food. It's not clear
Meat,
what it
like
is.
yeah, it's some type
Meat,
of
and
meat.
they're just living in luxury while, you know, everyone else is literally starving and living on the street.
Well,
It's
because then, like, I think, like, almost right after that scene, it cuts to, like, Fool, like, running around, like, the building that he lives in, and it's just, like, completely overcrowded. I mean, there's so many, like, drug users just sitting outside of his door and stuff like that, where he's trying to squeeze through so many people on the streets and just trying to get in, while these people have nobody in their front yards whenever they drive past. Like, they virtually live in solitude.
Yeah, and here's another thing. What do you think? Because I think you mentioned like there is a big class dynamic. You have the capitalist bourgeoisie and like the you know the mom and dad or whatever they're yeah mom and dad or brother and sister, and then you have you know Fool and his family kind of you know sort of at the bottom, and then you have when they go to rob the house, they have the Leroy is there, and then it's his friend Spencer who like they had
Mm-hmm.
already robbed a liquor store.
Yes.
But Leroy is suspicious that Spencer is going to steal, you know, like the golden coins from inside the house. And it also felt like there isn't even like solidarity amongst the people who should have it with each other. You know, they're not I mean, obviously they're robbing the landlords, but you know, beyond that, they just don't seem to have any there's no
It's still
class
every
solidarity
man for
amongst them.
their selves, and especially in that scene. And I wonder if that maybe, like, it could kind of be like a reference towards like white supremacy in a way, because Spencer is specifically like a white character and stuff like that, who like kind of does take like control over the situation, where he's like, well, we tried to send the boy in and it didn't work, so I'm gonna go. I have
Yeah.
to, if you want, like, if a man's job, so he says something specifically where it's like, if you want a job done right, like, it's a man's job, you try to send a boy to do a man's job or something like that. So I wonder if that's maybe, like, maybe not specifically, like, saying that, like, I don't know exactly, like, I don't know, I feel like I could see this, like, sort of being, like, the white people maybe, like, not having specific class solidarity because there's still so much like racism within America and stuff like that.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Oh, and the other thing is, so they have this like rumor of there being gold there. Where did they get their like buckets of gold? It's not exactly people aren't paying their rent in like ancient gold coins.
I
thought
don't
that
even
was just such a
understand that
weird
because
thing.
I felt like they just like brought it up out of nowhere too. Like,
I feel like that was a product of the time, like before. I can't remember which administration borrowed against like Social Security and the banks. So you should be able to go to the bank and you could buy silver and gold in
that's
exchange
whenever
for money.
our
Like even in
whenever our currency was actually like silver and gold backed. I think
yeah,
it was
actually
Reagan
backed.
that
And
like
it's
got
not
rid of it where it's
anymore.
no longer. I think it probably was Reagan where it's no longer
So
like backed by gold.
they likely pulled their money out because that was like their form, and like the value of gold can fluctuate like a stock in a sense, or at least used to. It's not as like volatile as Bitcoin or anything, but it holds value. If we go back to like
something pretty.
Marxist idea, because like gold, the way you extract it, the amount of human labor it requires to create one golden bar, and we can
Yeah.
take that and this is like wage labor and capital, or capital volume 1 we want to get into, but I don't want to get too far into it, so it's interesting. I think that's where it comes from. I digress.
Yeah, I don't. I do. Am familiar with the fact that you used to be able to do that. It sounds right that Reagan would have been the person to.
I don't know
You
for
know.
sure, like, not to, like, hate on Reagan more than normal, but it definitely was...
No, you should.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying that maybe he didn't do something so bad. Or it could have been Nixon, honestly. I kind of get them confused a little bit about some of their policies.
So this is like the. I mean, this is sort of like the gold. Oh, Republicans reviewed and rejected gold standard under Reagan
Oh, okay.
from mining.com.
God
So it
damn
sounds
it,
like
it
Ronald
was
Reagan's
Reagan.
at the bottom of everything. I can never rest. He's always there.
Always watching. Use
Oh,
the
it
symptograph.
sounds like they might have started to do it under Nixon.
Oh, see?
So but it seems
I
like
remember.
then they
Like him, like Reagan and Nixon, like Nixon is pretty up there for me. Like, I cannot stand Nixon.
he'd be like a liberal now though, which is kind of fucked up.
Which is
He'd
like,
be like
he wouldn't even be though. He's still
Kind
one of the
of.
worst. The only good thing, he did one good thing in office, and it was about national parks.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say he got impeached or
Yeah, I thought you were gonna
something.
say like
Oh.
when he died.
He didn't die in
I guess it
office.
wasn't. I guess that's true. So he got rid of the gold standard, and then in 1982 they tried to get it back, and the
Oh,
people
and
who were
then
in the Republicans were like, "Nah, we're not going to do that." So that is, but yeah, the gold. It also does feel like a very 90s thing just to have like gold coins and treasure more than just money. And it also makes kind of sense being that this family is super weird and they wouldn't put their money in a bank.
yeah, that's why they have some weird thing in
They're
their
really
basement.
Well, because we know because of like Rosa Luxemburg in Reform of Revolution, just how exploitative the banking system can be for the working class. And if you're rich enough, you don't really need
You
a
don't have to
bank.
trust a bank.
yeah.
So
You
for
can well,
listeners, if you don't know, banking is not
What do you mean
great.
for
It's
listeners?
really, I don't know. People
it's
listening
very
to the
it's very
podcast, they don't
racist.
know.
It's a very racist system that, especially once they created the credit scores in the
Oh
1980s,
yes,
I think too. Didn't Reagan create the credit scores? Sure.
probably. If
Everyone,
not, we can blame them.
this episode is brought to you by Ronald Reagan. All the things he did wrong, which is lots of them. I actually don't know if he was the one who brought in that, but it sounds about right. I mean, that made that so banks didn't have to rent to people or to loan to people if they didn't feel like it anymore. But actually, in my notes, I wrote down that the gold coins were some kind of like slave, like remnants of like slave ownership in this family.
That
Because it
too. That
seems
was
like,
probably like the generational wealth. Like they just kept it in the basement.
especially since the guy later says that the coin is worth enough for 10 years worth of rent.
And
He
his
says
mom's
like,
surgery.
and his mom's surgery. So it's, like 20 grand for like one little gold. And, it's like, what's the pirate? One of the pirates. It's their golden treasure.
The bloom.
Booty. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Johnny Depp.
Oh,
We'll
Jack
cut that
Sparrow.
out. Yeah, Jack Sparrow. I'll cut all that out. Yeah, Jack Sparrow. But the other thing too is that the family dynamic. I think I didn't really know what to make of this, and I wonder what you both thought is. They have this girl, Alice, who's essentially their prisoner. We learn later. It seems like they got her from
They kidnapped
birth.
her.
Like she was a baby. Her whole life she's grown up in this house. They're trying to like essentially groom her for some man that they can't ever find because no one is perfect enough. Like what do you make of that part of this? It's like another aspect of the horror that's much different. It's like a grooming, sexual, abusive. It's very really. That's the weird part of this.
It's
movie.
very interesting to me, like, especially watching that stuff. And I know probably Mariah has more of a comment about this than I do. But since they're so, like, evangelical and stuff like that and very religious people, I feel like that kind of, like, ties in with how they're raising Alice specifically, because they talk about, like, if you notice, like, in the basement, it's all boys, all men that are in the cellar, pretty much. I think that's, like, one of the quotes is that, like, Alice is talking to Fool, like, saying, like, oh, like, Daddy had to take all the men and cut them up and, like, speak no evil or whatever, and so that's why there's all men in the basement. So I wonder if it's, like, because of, like, evangelicals and how they view, like, women specifically is why, like, they haven't, like, they abuse Alice significantly, but not as severe as they do other people, I guess. I'm not sure. Mariah knows more about the religious stuff than I do.
Well, I like when we're like getting into this, and I was researching for this episode. I didn't know that Wes Anderson had a basis on a real story that he had seen in the papers in Los Angeles, where there was this burglary in a nice neighborhood, and the police went and they saw that there was different parts of this house that were boarded up and barricaded, and there was all of these kids hiding, or I think there was 3 half-naked children that had never been outside, and they found them, and it was like the same scenario. And he's like, what's scary is like real life is scary. So that's what he wrote this after. And in recent news, we've seen that this just happened a couple of years ago.
Oh,
I don't know if you remember this.
On TikTok.
With that
I
family
saw
that
them.
had kept up.
Yeah.
So it was like, this is a relative, and it was like the same thing, like where it's like religious. They're really, it's almost like a cult, very small scale, like cult, where they're like trying to indoctrinate their children for whatever nefarious reason. But I think in regards to this film, it seems as though they need somebody to inherit that wealth, and they need to brainwash these kids so that they can be the ones who take over this big enterprise of like landlordism that they have inherited, because they don't have anyone to pass it off to, and they are getting older. So that's my theory as to why they're doing it. But there is the weird religious aspect where it's like, hear no evil, see no evil.
Constantly
And then
referring
they
to
say burn
hell.
in
like
hell
Roach.
is, like, their thing.
Roach is the one of the characters that like gets his tongue cut out, and like when she Alice she's like helps some like fool or whatever, and she gets thrown in that hot bathtub. Just like the way that they like scrub the impurities, they have to make her pure.
The white dress.
It gives very much like the extreme white, like what am I thinking? Like the white crypto fash.
Yeah,
that's definitely
Christians
like the
in
vibes
America,
like it definitely like reminded me of like the extreme, like even like the KKK and stuff like that with their like extreme like, because like this family, well, like not Alice, but like the mother, father, man, woman, whatever you want to call them, they were like very racist, like outwardly racist too, and
dropping hard R's.
Yeah, they were like crazy. Really? It was like sickening to watch.
So the fact that she goes around full, which is a black child, and they're like, okay, you need to get scrubbed up. Like that's telling of how they view like the people, the demographic of people that they're renting to, and why they're so like they're willing to evict Fool's family, who's like experiencing economic hardships and health problems, but they don't care.
Yeah, they like there's like a bunch of, which I also want to talk about, is like the cops in this movie, which is also very indicative.
They're the
of,
realest
like,
cops.
Yeah, well, but there's one point, like there's one scene where I think the cops come the first time because they notice the van that's in the driveway when Fool is stuck inside. He's banging on the door. The cops don't listen, of course, because the cop isn't going to come help the kid who's in danger, who's black. And they mentioned that the neighborhood is changing. I think they used the term. And then later, the craziest line I thought of the thing, he says, oh man, where is it? I have a lot of. He says it's as if we're the prisoners and the criminals roam free. He says
that's what like, the mom says. The
mom says to one of the cops later. It's like they view themselves as this.
Their press class. That's so like white supremacy, like Republicans on like. You see it all over Fox News where like they want to sit here and be like, oh, we're the ones getting oppressed, blah blah blah. When like their oppression is like, oh, their tweet got taken off of Twitter.
No, it's like exactly what happened after like the abolition of the Jim Crow system and the civil rights or whatever. And then we went to the whole like crime and punishment. So instead of labeling people in regards to like the color of their skin, like, oh, we're just against crime now.
Yeah.
But we all know because of like the rise of the prison industrial complex, mass incarceration, who that was aimed towards.
Well, they're doing it right now. I mean, think of the way
it's never gone away.
News,
yeah.
It's like basically Fox's News bread and butter is talking about crime in Chicago. You know, the crime
Detroit.
in Chicago. It's like it's a very what's the word?
It's a racially charged term.
Yeah.
And then it's just like with these over policed areas and stuff like that, we're like, I'm sure like the family was very much looking out like, oh, we rent to these poor people that are all like criminals and stuff like that, whenever they are probably they're no more criminals than the white people landlords that are literally like imprisoning people in their basement and stuff like that. And I know there's been plenty of studies where like specifically on like weed and stuff like that, where white people and black people smoke weed at the same percentage, but who gets arrested more for weed and drug crimes? Obviously, it's black people because of the way the prison industrial complex is set up.
So here's another slightly unrelated question. Why do they keep the people under the stairs? So this is the point in the movie we've kind of been talking about, but basically Fool attempts to go with his two older, the Leroy and
Spencer.
They go to basically to rob the house to get money so they can pay their rent. to they're going to steal the money and essentially give it back to the people they stole it from in the
Honestly,
form of
real.
rent, which is, yeah, it's crazy. And so Spencer goes in, presumably you already kind of know this is when the movie kind of just, it goes off pretty quickly. Some horror movies, they give you like 45 minutes, an hour of build up. This movie just goes like right into
This
the
movie is really
fucked up
short
shit.
too, though. It's only like an hour 40, but
Yeah, it is.
it felt so long. It felt longer than an hour 40.
I think it's because so much of the movie is sort of like the chasing from the danger, whereas, and yeah, so they go into the house. Leroy and then Fool go in after him, and they discover the kind of the weirdness of the house. There's sounds, they can hear all kinds of things, and Fool gets locked, in the basement briefly. He sees kind of like the creepiness down below, and we learn that there's these people that are essentially locked up in the basement, presumably without tongues because they're not talking, and we see later that Roach has his tongue out. But like, I don't quite understand why they didn't just kill them all. It's very,
I don't know. Well, because I think they liked having the power over, like, it's very much like a power dynamic that they have. Just like, I think, kind of like in parallel to why they're landlords and why they exploit the people that live in the homes that they own. So specifically, it's just to have like the direct like power structure that they can see and stuff like that. I don't know why they like kidnap so many children in general.
well,
Or
they
like,
mentioned they're finding a boy for Alice, but then they also say that people come along later. Alice has that
oh yeah,
basket of all the little
like
dolls that she
workers.
had knitted, and it's like all the people who come to look at the house, they end up just killing, and they're constantly getting away with it too, which I think is also quite ironic. They're like shooting guns off inside of like a residential neighborhood, and like no one
Yeah,
comes.
that's what I was like. I was like, I would think that like if you hear like like that dude shoots, and then it was towards the end whenever like Fool gets out of the house, and then like the dude, the man, father, whatever, he like shoots the gun outside, and then like the woman comes out and she's like, "Don't you ever shoot your gun outside," as if the sound is still not traveling whenever you're inside.
Yeah, we don't want them to think we're bad people. We just have to. I know part of what I wrote down was I like the what you said, Kristen, is sort of like the power dynamic, but it also seemed like they also, I don't know who named the character Roach, but it's also a very obvious like tell to,
Like the cockroach
we
being
perceive,
able to...
yeah, we perceive the people in our shitty residential units as like little cockroaches that we can step on.
I
And
thought
it
of it
has,
as more of like an endearing name where it's like Roach is able to endure and survive so much through like this, and like like the cockroaches are all supposed to be able to like survive a nuclear bomb or whatever.
true. I hadn't thought about that.
That's how I kind of more took his nickname as, where like I guess like you can kind of see it both ways though, because like to like the landlords, the mother and the father, or whatever, they viewed him as like a pest and like a way. But then to like, I mean, with whenever he dies, I guess that's a spoil. I guess we kind of like already talked about it. Like whenever he
Yeah,
dies in the movie, I think it's kind of like he's kind of like a hope for like Fool and stuff like that, where like he promises Fool promises Roach that he's gonna save Alice too. And so I feel
yeah,
like almost like viewing it as like in that way, like to the kids, he's kind of more of like a positive like
yeah.
person.
That's true. And I also wrote down at this point that I don't know. This wasn't necessarily about what was happening right here, but before they go into the house, I was thinking because most movies that I can think of, especially Wes Craven movies, are like slasher kind of movies, whereas this movie felt like it was like the movie Halloween is very much, in my estimation, and I think a lot of people talk about it being like the threat of violence in like white suburbs, like, oh, we're threatened, we're these white people in the suburbs and we're now threatened, whereas this is like the opposite, where it's actually like the white suburban rich people who are the violence. And I think it's usually the case, like they are the ones committing the violent acts, like especially given that they're like landlords, slumlords, if you want to use that derogatory term, which I don't know who that Yeah. So it felt very pointed.
Well, because, like, I think one thing with, like, you could talk about, like, within, like, white supremacy and stuff like that, with, like, the mass shooters and stuff like that, where it's, like, significantly are more white people that are causing these mass devastations, at least here in the United States, where it is actually white people, where I think it's interesting how, like, in other horror movies, it's kind of not, like, they don't really focus on, they always keep, like, the violence to, like, almost like a faceless character, where they're not... It's like anybody could be under the mask sort of thing, but then this specifically is like, no, white people are specifically causing violence towards poor communities, which you can see in like mass shootings.
Because like they're the ones that are going to get away with it. If anyone's going to get away with it,
The ones out in the
like
open.
petty bourgeois, like white folk who have money, they have resources, they can do whatever they want. They're shooting off shotguns in their own house, like, and the cops don't care.
Yeah, and the other thing that's like just completely a random thing, not random, but I think it's so insane is like the way that they built their house has these like crazy locking systems, false cabinets in
yeah.
the stairs. Like they built some crazy shit in this
You're
house.
living like a spy house.
I mean, it's they, and I think it's also funny. You were talking about sort of the religious aspect is these religious people and the amount of effort they're going through to maintain this facade of them being like good people when the cops come, canning out coffee and cookies, and she's disgusted by the fact that she has to do this. And I don't know. It's I don't know where I was going with that.
Makes you wonder what happened before. Because I can't imagine all of that being built like while they're just living there. Like what if that was all built prior? Like it's a generational thing that they've been carrying on.
Like
their parents were never actually their parents. They were just socialized into believing that. And they also kept people under the stairs or some shit.
Yeah.
Maybe. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
because you don't know
true.
anything about like their family. Just you know that they're brother and sister. So what if they're not brother and sister?
Well, the grandfather says later that they've
always avoided that house.
Well, each generation has gotten like crazier and crazier, and so for generations they've known not to go there. They were funeral home directors, but my guess is before they were a funeral home, or maybe it's the idea that the funeral home is the thing that's covering up the fact that they're just like chopping up people, putting it into like this weird grinding machine. Like the basement is really twisted. Mm-hmm. It's like a cattle pen for human beings, and they have this trap where like and also all the people down below are presumably cannibals. I guess that's the implication.
Yeah,
they're eating.
Well, because they have like that pit of like acid or something where they like throw
so
the
gross.
Bodies in, and then like they have the whole incinerator.
I guess the incinerator is if they were
actual funeral
burning.
Home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cremation.
I don't think you do cremation in a house. Like, is that legal to do cremation?
Well, assuming that it wasn't originally a house and then maybe they turned it into, it kind of reminds me of in My Girl. I mean, she lives in like a funeral home thing,
yeah.
But I don't remember if they have like a crematorium in there.
Maybe that's the way they don't want like police and whatnot, like servicemen looking around to see if they don't have like the permits to operate like a giant cremation.
And there's also dynamite everywhere.
Furnace.
Oh, yeah. Like, they're ready to blow that house up whenever they have to. I don't understand that. And, like, honestly, like, the spaces in between their walls are, like, huge. Like, there's, like, whole rooms pretty much in between. Like, and, the way that it's all connected. Like, you go through a cabinet and then you're in between the walls.
Yeah, I wrote a note that before, because also Fool says when he walks into the living room, he says something to the effect of, like, imagine how many families could live here,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because his entire apartment is probably the size of that one living room.
Yeah.
And it shows the, what was the other? Yeah, and so I know what else. I was looking at the Wikipedia page. I know we talked about, like, Reagan era, but I noticed that there was a review from... I think it was maybe it was the AV Club, but they mentioned that the mom and the dad were like nightmare versions of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, which I think is pretty funny.
That was Mariah that wrote that. That was not an actual news source. Mariah went on the Wikipedia page and edited that.
I wish I would give I wish I was that person.
It
Oh
says
my
it came from
god.
the movie. Let's see. It was from Empire Magazine from 2015.
God,
That's
that's so fucking
Mariah's
funny.
magazine editorial.
And then LA
Whoever,
Week
they have my heart.
and then LA Weekly called it a satire of late capitalism, which is basically also what you said earlier. And it also is just talking about how it says, quote, specifically in LA run ragged by the free market of the 1980s and the violence it created. So I mean, yeah, these are basically things we were saying. I had this open, but I forgot to look at it. And one of the other, and it mentions, oh, okay, this is the thing I want to talk about. So when Fool goes down in the basement at the very first time and he's poking around, he sees a TV
Oh,
and he twists it around and it's showing the Iraq Gulf War footage.
I didn't
And
know what it
I
was.
don't know. It was like a very product. I mean, I'm old and I remember watching Iraq War on TV, like the first Iraq War, the first time when we tried to get Saddam. That's why Daddy, a son, had to go in and finish the job that Daddy couldn't get done. But I thought that was so weird to me that they're down there. One, they're watching this TV and they like move it back. It's a really creepy scene. And they're watching like I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. It just, I guess it's
That's an
1991.
interesting choice of like what these people that are in the basement that can't even talk, can't even like they don't have like proper like communicationals, but then they're watching like
Yeah.
modern day news. I'm surprised they even have
Yeah.
a TV down there, honestly. Like, you think because like how like sheltered Alice is and stuff like that.
Yeah. I
Like
mean,
that
But
definitely seems
if
like a
it's only
commentary
streaming
on
like
something.
US exceptional propaganda for them, they figure like, oh, well, we can't do that. At least we can show them like the
Fox
light, the good
News.
way.
or,
Fox News on
or,
repeat.
or is it like saying that the world out there is, dangerous? You have to
This is why
stay
you're staying
inside.
here. I don't
I
know,
mean,
but
this was,
that whoever it was, he wanted to watch that again. He said, "Put that back over here.
he's like, did they get Saddam yet?
I gotta
they,
watch.
they get
This is
him?
my
Well,
show."
well I mean, also the movie is showing sort of like the class warfare and gentrification. I mean, the other side of that is you said prison industrial complex before is what caused such damage to the black community, but also so did war. I mean, granted that this wasn't like a gigantic war like the second Iraq War, but it just shows also the military industrial complex that's being fed money, whereas they can't. These people that are being held against their will are watching the United States commit like imperialism abroad. Like that's
I didn't even think
I
It's
about
just like
that.
it's hard to think about like if like in the Soviet micro districts, like USSR, like this was not happening. There was no mommy and daddies that were like super landlords. Like they did an effective job at combating landlordism to make a more equitable society for working class peoples. So, this wouldn't be happening under communism. I'm just saying.
well, this
You
I'm not
movie
say
trying to
this
be
came.
at
utopian.
You say this is exactly what Mariah said whenever we were talking about Coraline. Whenever
Yeah, I
like
think I said it. Willy Wonka too.
You could say it in virtually any of these movies, I guess,
half
unless
of
it's
these
a.
It's
conflicts
true.
wouldn't happen.
If there wasn't landlordism, how could the material conditions yield this type of like atrocity, the crime against humanity?
All right. You said this is a coming age story for Fool. What if the coming of age story is that somewhere along the way he got Mao's red book, was radicalized, and wanted to kill some landlords?
Based.
That would be wild if he like watched some old like Huey Newton talks, like Black Panther Party, because it would be around like
That time.
similar-ish
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
think Huey was still alive then, like maybe not 1991. Can't remember when he died.
Well,
I think it was like the late 80s.
well, because Fool's supposed to be 13. So, I mean,
Yeah.
he definitely could have been like
2 years
like-
before he died. P.P. Newton, 89. So, yeah.
Yeah,
He could have
so
been
like he would have been
radicalized.
around that a little bit at least, especially being in like California.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and it's funny that I mentioned this as a satire. I mean, so many times I think you've been on a lot of these episodes, Rye, of episodes that like conservatives and anonymous PFPs with Patrick Bateman in their profile, they take a movie the wrong way. I don't feel like this is a movie where anyone could take any other message, but I also don't think this is a movie that conservatives would like.
I don't think it's a very popular movie, like, in
It's
general now. Like, it's almost like I hadn't heard of it. I hadn't really talked to, like, anybody else on whether or not they've heard of it, so I don't know if it's maybe just because, like, since it's not so big, that, like, conservatives aren't even aware that they could misconstrue this entire idea. And so they're
You
like...
can be horribly media illiterate to
I mean,
not see the points of this film.
I'm
They're
sure
just
you've
so...
seen the people on TikTok. There's plenty of people there, I promise you.
I feel like it's people who intentionally misunderstand. I don't know. Sometimes I can't think of any other way to.
Well, Mariah, your family likes this movie, and they're conservative.
I know. It doesn't
So-
make any sense. I should ask them why my mother likes this movie so much.
There's your media illiterate person.
But I almost feel like it falls into like the human trafficking genre of like conservatives that are like
QAnon.
like voice of. So like yeah,
This is what the
Okay.
government
That
is
could be.
doing.
somehow blame it on the commies.
Right. No, the mom and the dad are the government. The people under the stairs are the working conservatives that they just want to go outside and buy a pickup, and
That's my only theory.
that's the stretch of the of our episode. But I mean, the other thing too that I also just noted, I don't know, I feel like I wrote a bunch about this, but Dexter also is afraid of the people down in the basement initially under the stairs, and then
I
he
mean, they're kinda
realizes he has
scary.
like a solid. I mean, yeah, it's creepy. You're 13 years old. There's a bunch of people just kind of grunting, and
But
you
then
see
they
their
save
eyes.
him. They
Right,
help him.
but I feel like Dexter or Fool, he gains like some kind of solidarity with they gain solidarity with each other, where they realize who the
He's
enemy
just
is.
as trapped as they are in that house. Well, because like there's like the quote that the father says to Roach whenever he's like running through the house and he's like shooting at like Roach through the walls or whatever. He says, "Burn in hell for getting free and burn in hell for showing the way," which I think is a great quote that like I can see so many like people from the ruling class or the bourgeois saying that to the proletariat, where it's basically like talking about like since the people in the basement cannot escape, somehow Roach escaped. We don't know, like he showed the way, and so I think that's another reason why like it seems like the people in the basement are so like disgruntled and more like I guess more like vocal and like more not specifically like they seemed like they were probably more dormant before, I guess I would assume, because of the way that the family is sort of like seeming to go more and more extreme by how they're acting, because they're like they used to not be like this, blah blah blah. And I think that can be like kind of like a great representation of like the working class like combining together and rebelling against the oppressors.
So Roach is like an allegory for like class consciousness
Yes.
and like being Marx and showing people the way.
Yeah,
He brought Mao up to the upstairs for Fool. Well, and this is completely unrelated to that. Maybe I pushed Fool being a Maoist a little too far, but Alice says too when they were like trying to leave. Alice says something that's like one of the that like stuck with me is she mentions the people in the basement, and she says like, "Oh, I think they're happy in their own way." It's just she's so brainwashed that she like feels like the people are happy, and when she can't even leave the house, that's why she doesn't make like the jump, from the roof like after the chasing.
That's
like
like
so much
the
of the movie is trying
liberal-
to get away.
that's the liberal like ideology where they talk about how like even like poor people and stuff like that, well, if they just wanted to live in nicer houses or whatever, they would just work harder, sort of thing. Like they're obviously like content with
You
their
should just be
life.
happy with what you have.
Yeah.
At least you're alive and in America.
Yeah.
Land of the free, home of
It's
the
very
brave.
much like that's kind of like I think the idea that like, and I think I guess like the innocence that Alice can represent is maybe the more like working class people that are maybe a little bit more better off, because like comparatively Alice is better off than the people in the basement. I mean, she still is very much abused and stuff like that, and I think that can kind of represent like the petty bourgeois in a way, if you think about it, like with how like she's like, well, I'm up here and it like I'm not getting murdered, so it's not that bad.
It's like the people
Yeah.
that benefit from like imperialism and whatnot, but they're still working class people in the United
Yes.
States, and like maybe a little bit higher up, like middle class,
Yeah.
whatever the fuck that means. But
The
you know, they're not
upper middle
struggling. They're just
class.
like, oh, those poor people in like the exploited global South. Well, I'm gonna go
Yeah.
have a good time. Go to Coachella. You know,
I can definitely see
Fucking-
like Alice sort of representing that in that way, where it's like I guess like the way they kind of do it is that like she's just like so unaware of like what is truly wrong because she's so sheltered and brainwashed, which I think that's like something that like we as Marxists can maybe like look at more as like talking to like liberals and like stuff like that, where it's just like people that are like very unaware of what is going on specifically.
Yeah. She definitely is very unaware. And it's also the point where there's a scene when she is punished for dropping her fork and maybe feeding Roach in the thing, and she's punished for, giving a little bit of a crumb to the people under the stairs, and it's very it is kind of what I think is also crazy about this movie is, one, how big the house is, and how, like you mentioned before, Chris, and how like the insides of the walls are huge, but like the upstairs is enormous. They don't show that many rooms. I mean, probably for purposes of filming, but it's clearly a massive house. There's walls. The basement's enormous, and Fool escapes, and he steals one of the gold coins. And I mentioned before, alluded to, is how he learns that the gold coin can pay his rent for a decade, get his mom his cancer surgery, and so it's clear that the wealth that they've accumulated has now made it so that their lives are. He now sees, he's now realizes that he can make his life better, but he decides to go back and liberate the people from the house. So he could just save himself and just be like, I'm done with this.
It's rather than like the progressive reforms of, oh, let's just accept like the crumbs that they're gonna give us. Let's take the initiative and have solidarity and revolt and get something that's going to benefit the collective.
Exactly. And then you
like in like FDR time,
Yes. That kind of brings sort of towards so he leaves, he finds out he's gonna, they're gonna save his mother, but then he goes back mostly to save Alice, but I think he also wants to save all the people there. Well, go ahead.
What I was gonna say, well, because like how he saves Alice is honestly so like genius too, because he calls like the police and he knows the police aren't gonna do anything, so he didn't actually leave it up to the police to save her either. Whenever he called them like to do like a welfare check or like a child abuse situation or whatever, he's hiding in the cabinet the whole time because he knows the police are gonna actually do anything. They're not gonna save Alice. They're just gonna go out and like pretend to do whatever and then leave, and so that's why he's already there to help her.
Yeah, he realizes already, he's now learned the police aren't there to help you, and so he's gonna save her. And then he the one smart thing that the mom and dad do is they have that little recorder going in the bedroom with them talking, so they could sneak up on him. So they clearly knew he was in the house or somehow, but I don't really understand why the father has to dress up in this like leather suit. It is.
I don't know.
It's just like, we're just gonna throw some S&M in here, and that's because maybe Wes Craven's a adult started his career as an adult star. Maybe that's like a Wes Craven kink. I don't know.
That was definitely like insane. Like I don't know. Like I saw that. I was
like,
like,
on
what
his
is
own
this?
persona? Like,
but he's not even. He's still like. I don't know, he still listens to the mother or the woman or whatever. Like, it's not like he's in charge of her.
It's kind of impressive because to think to put on all that leather or latex, like, you got to use a lot of, like, lube
baby
and powder
yeah.
to get it all on.
He gets it on pretty quick.
He does get it on pretty quickly. He just, like, the cops are gone.
Down pat.
He probably makes Alice, like, help him put it on because he's a fucking creepy motherfucker.
Oh, yeah. There's, like, the scene wherever, like, she like whenever she's like chained up, he like comes in and he's like talking to her, starts like touching himself while she's talking to him, like begging to get out of the chains or whatever. I was like, what the fuck?
He also had many instant like moment of this is like a MacGuffin kind of thing, but there's so many times where he could have killed Fool, could have killed Alice. Like there are times he had the
Yeah.
gun to his head, and he like doesn't do it, and
Oh yeah,
you
like
know,
they're like there's so many of them wrestling with the gun where like it could have been shot like 5 or 10 times by that time.
and I think and then like the culmination sort of at the end is the sister comes. Like you only have a couple instances of the sister, and actually they mentioned earlier that she was a sex worker to pay their rent. Like they kind of like slowly slide
I
that
did
in
not
at the
hear
beginning.
I didn't hear that.
I think what's her name?
Ruby, I think.
Ruby. And so Ruby comes to the door,
I
and
have
they
her
don't want to
quote.
talk to her. And then they bring in the
The
Grandpa
grandpa.
Booker and like the whole community. And I thought was like another instance, like the mom was going to also drop another N bomb on
Oh
the
yeah,
two,
because she was
and they
like,
open
I
the
only
door.
see two, and then she was gonna shoot him, and then the rest of the people come out. And she's like, you can't shoot all of us, which is like, well, because that quote right there where she's like, you and your brother are landlords for over 50 buildings, and you've allowed to deteriorate and become rat infested, and then you're just gonna evict anybody that can't pay rent, so then you can build more office buildings and stuff. Like her little monologue is amazing. But then I think like with the community showing up in that scene is such like a great representation of like what can actually happen if people choose to organize and do actual praxis within society, and what we could achieve as like even just like with the writer strike that just happened in Hollywood, like with people withholding their labor, and what can happen if like we as a massive like world nation decided to like withhold labor, what the great things that could happen.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, I agree with that, but here I want to go to like the very end. So the very end, essentially, Fool sees the money downstairs, and he ends up blowing off the dynamite, blowing up the house, and then money is spouting out the chimney, and all the people outside are like grabbing the money, and I just like a lot of movies. This is I feel like a common thing when I watch movies that have good themes, it's good satire, it's good, a lot of good pieces to it. I feel like the very end is like a little bit. I don't know how I would do it. I don't have like an answer, but I feel like it feels like one of those situations of we know that capitalism is bad, but we don't really know what to do or how we could fix it or like what would be better. It feels like this very anticlimactic ending where like they're getting a little pittance of the wealth is being spread, I guess, in some sense from the rich, but I don't know, I could be totally wrong.
So the ending you wanted was then for Fool to go and kill every landlord across the United States.
Or at least they could have formed a tenant union. Something. Like it's just kind of like it's great. Like I'm so glad that he blew up.
Yeah.
Like Riff Raff. Like he's just done.
Yeah.
But like blow up like I don't know nobody.
Like it's not a bad ending. I guess I just felt like there could have been a more satisfying
But it also makes me wonder what's gonna happen with all those kids under the stairs. Like
they got out.
The
They ran away.
They got out, but like
I don't
Where's
think
they
their
don't have
healthcare?
any
anymore.
marketable skills. There's no healthcare. They need like vitamin D stat. They need to go to the hospital. They need therapy. And we don't have those social safety nets in place for them.
Like they probably just died on the streets.
Yeah, they need to give them some of those gold coins so they can and that's the thing too is like yeah, I mean it just leaves kind of that
There's
I
still
get
so
it
much
like
help that is needed within society.
yeah, and again, like I'm being very nitpicky. Like I think this is a great movie. I feel like the ending is still pretty good. I think Wes Craven made a movie that has a lot to say. It's very satirical. It's not that scary. The only thing about this movie that I didn't like is I don't like animal cruelty in like horror movies.
Whenever the dog.
So like the dog scene wasn't as bad as in some like in John Wick or something like that where the
Oh my god, spoilers.
it's like the first scene in the first. It's like the second scene in the movie.
I've never seen John Wick.
Oh, okay. Well,
I knew
feel
the
like
dog
it's
died though.
okay. That was why I didn't watch the movie
It
actually
does?
until recently. That's his entire
Like
premise.
that's why he becomes John Wick is because his dog died, so then he like goes to kill the people that killed his dogs. or
And took
dog.
I
his
know
car.
Brandon made me watch those films.
Who?
Brandon, he
Oh.
loves John Wick. They just
I've-
fight for like 3 hours.
I actually enjoy them as like a mindless action movie. I watched the first two so far, just recently. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any real general like problems with this movie. I think given that it's a Wes Craven movie, it's almost hard to believe that he made this movie and that I couldn't find anything to say that he like wrote the script with anyone. It was him. But I don't know. I don't know if you either have any last
Would you
things.
recommend this movie?
Oh my
Oh,
god.
damn it. Damn it. You said this in our Willy Wonka episode where I said that at the end.
That's because she does it for the books. That's her whole thing.
I know,
is at
I
the end
know,
of the
I
books
know.
is like, would you
I
recommend
know.
reading this book? Well, I feel
I
like
know.
if, by the time you're at this point, you either seen the movie or you haven't. Like, you're not going to, because there's no point in watching the movie now if you've listened to this all the way through.
Well, you know what I should do? I see podcasts do this in movie podcasts where they'll kind of mark in the notes like when they start talking about sort of the ending or like the big
Oh,
spoilers.
yeah.
I don't think I'm going to do that, but you could theoretically be like, go to 1 hour and 1 minute where you ask us if we think it's good, and then you can decide. I don't know. But again, yes, I recommend this movie to anyone who does not like landlords, likes horror movies, does not like super scary horror movies because I don't feel like it's like a jump scare,
There were a
spooky,
few
creepy.
scenes where I thought there was going to be a jump scare, but then there wasn't. Like, there was, like, no
Yeah, it's-
jump scares in it, but there's, like, kind of like, oh, I think there's going to be one, and so you get nervous.
It's not like a typical Wes Craven kind of horror movie. It's different. It's very political again. It's
Wait,
wasn't
this movie
a,
is political?
No, this is you're listening to just the Projector. We just talk about movies with a straight
What
line.
happened from the
Eh.
beginning to the end? At the end.
It's fun. I was on an episode I haven't released recently. I can cut this out, but it was funny. We're like minute 48, and I'm like, well, if you don't like capitalism, maybe you should stop listening. And I think one of the guys like, well, I think if you wouldn't be listening to this moment,
Yeah.
if you were like
I
a
just
fan
listened to a
of- 2-hour
2-hour podcast, but I hate communism.
Yes, maybe. Yeah. Well, no. If you're a conservative, you listen to the first 2 minutes and then read a mean review on Apple Podcasts. Or
Have you
something.
gotten mean reviews?
I have not.
Oh,
I do know that on Spotify I've gotten reviews that are either because at first you could tell when you get like one or two, you could see how many reviews you got, what your rating was. You would know what the next rating was. I'm like a weird math figuring it out. And I noticed someone gave me 3 stars, which I think is worse than 1 star. Because
Really?
like either hate, I don't know. Because like
I
you
give
liked
everything
it, kind
3
of.
stars. Mariah makes fun of me because, like, I think it's just mid. That's what 3 stars is mid.
I would rather you tell me my shit sucks. Than give me
Then
1
be
star.
mid.
Be like it's 1 star or 5 stars. Like those are your only choices. And if you're listening, go on to podcast platform and rate this podcast. Not a 3, 1 or 5, please. That's what I would ask. But yeah, I mean, would you recommend this movie, Kristen? You already said Rye. You like this movie, obviously. So.
It depends on, like, I would recommend this movie, but I'm not somebody, like, I don't think I could see myself rewatching it anytime soon. It would definitely have to be something that I watch, like, in a couple years again to, like, because it kind of is, like, really, like, icky feeling. Like, it's one of those movies that kind of gives you, like, that, like, you feel kind of, like, seeing, like, the way that, like, the man and the woman act and, like, how, like, insane they are, like, they make me very uncomfortable. Like, I think
Yes.
that's, like, they're great for what they did. I think that's exactly how, like, a horror movie should be. But since it is so, like, almost, like, disturbing, and, like, the way that they, like, abuse, like, Alice and, like, that, like, it's just something that I can only take, like, so much of. So I do think this is not for somebody that's, like, faint of heart.
Yeah, and I think actually in like the way that I often look at a lot of horror, like if it makes you feel like in these weird ways, I feel like he probably was going for that. I'm guessing like he
Yes.
wanted to make you uncomfortable. That's what so much of like there's certain horror movies that I'll watch one time. I don't feel like I'll ever need to see it again, and other ones where I'll
Like,
watch
Hereditary,
Scream.
I'm never watching Hereditary again.
I didn't find that movie that scary.
I just hate the scene where her fucking head comes off, and I literally had to sit there like this. Like, I could not watch it. It's
Yeah,
like
spoilers for
sorry for
Hereditary.
Hereditary. If you haven't seen Hereditary, don't
I can
watch
cut
it.
that.
I hate
But
that
yeah.
movie. And like Midsummer, I probably won't watch that again either. And I know Mariah loves that movie, but like,
It's like one of my favorite movies.
It's great, but it isn't for me one that I would like watch
there's
all
no
the
reason
time.
to like rewatch it. I feel like.
For me, it's movies like a lot of childhood horror movies that I really like. Like I'll watch, Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street or my
Chucky.
favorite Chucky's. I saw like Chucky 3 in the theater when I was like 11 or something, and it was
Oh my
pretty
God.
unfortunate.
I feel like I've only seen like the first one, and then I saw The Seed of Chucky. That movie was gross.
A
Just,
lot of
like,
them are pretty
so
gross.
stupid.
And actually, I should have been doing this too on all the other horror movies. It's too late. But maybe I'll ask everyone's like what their favorite horror movie is that they would recommend to people. Maybe that's the other thing too. Do you
Oh.
like maybe instead of asking if they like this movie? Well, I guess you could do both. A recommendation.
For like a different movie.
No, I guess it could be a horror movie since we're talking like the same. I don't know. I could cut all this out of it if we all.
Mariah,
Oh my
what's a
goodness.
horror movie you would recommend? I don't watch that
I
much
am
horror.
a big horror movie junkie. That was like my thing. It started with zombie movies, and it was bad B movies. I've watched like all of, but like my favorite one, I really do like
28 Days Later.
Midsummer. 28 Days Later is really good.
Which one's that?
Um,
Is that? Hold on, I gotta look this up.
I mean, for me, if you're gonna watch a zombie movie, this will
I
be
haven't
coming
seen it.
out. You'll be listening to
Killian
this episode.
Murphy is in 28 Days Later.
Yeah.
mhm.
Wow.
But all the George A. Romero zombie movie universe is just.
You like Night of the Living
Christopher
Dead.
I just
Eccleston
did an
is in
episode on
this.
that. It's coming out
Christopher
soon.
Eccleston is in 28 Days Later. I'm gonna have to watch.
Yeah, I can't believe you've never seen it.
I don't watch the horror
It's like
movies.
a staple zombie movie. Like
I don't watch.
that.
Do you want to know what zombie movie I have seen? Warm Bodies, and that's it.
Oh, Kristen.
I
say
love Nicholas Hoult though, so
My recommendation for this podcast, if you're going to watch a horror movie that's maybe completely ridiculous, is the movie Chopping Mall. If you like campy 1980s horror movies that make absolutely no sense and are just ridiculous, it's literally about a shopping mall where the owners of the shopping mall are bring in like actual robots, like RoboCop type situation, and to monitor the mall, and they essentially just you can guess from the shopping mall part what's going to happen.
You know what? I changed mine for Halloween. I think Trick or Treat is one of my favorite like spooky Halloween
That movie is
campy
so
movies.
boring.
Kristen.
What I'll recommend is Evil Dead, the second one.
Which
though.
one?
The second one.
Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, I like.
No Army of Darkness?
Army of Darkness is okay, but I like the first two better. But the first one and the second one are like the same, and I feel like you should just watch the second one. Don't watch the first one.
I like the first one too, but yeah,
The first
second
one's
one is
fine,
pretty.
but I think the second one like makes a better like well-rounded story.
I'm also a huge fan of all of the James Wan, like The Conjuring and the. All of
Oh,
those.
I like those. I've
Those
seen
are
like
really
the
good.
first one. That one
You ever
was.
watch like Train to
Insidious.
Busan?
I
I've seen
started
that.
that
It's a good
one.
one.
I see like all of these horror movies. I start though, but then I get bored. I wish I was even thinking that like I have such a like a zoomer brain where I wish I could watch half of these movies on 2 times speed.
I have Shudder, so I watch a lot of these like of horror movies. But I think the other I'll tell you another. If you should watch Shaun of the Dead, that's like the best funny horror.
I've
movie.
heard that's really good. See, like I don't
it's
know
really-
any horror movies.
that's-
I don't watch any of them.
It's all the Edgar Wright movies. So with Simon Pegg and
Oh.
Nick Frost, they do the whole. What's the other ones they have? I used to love those movies.
I've heard of Simon Pegg. I know that name. He's like the white dude.
He did The World's End. He did Scott Pilgrim versus the World actually too.
Edgar
Hot
Wright.
Fuzz.
Yes. Oh,
Hot
Baby Driver.
Fuzz. Yep.
I like Baby Driver, even though that movie has a terrible cast.
Yeah, Shaun of the Dead is one of the best like humorous horror movies you can see.
I definitely need to
And
watch more horror, especially this month.
And if you're listening, you can also go back and listen to my episode on Dawn of the Dead from last year. Another one of my favorite another George A. Romero.
Are you doing more horror movies this month?
Yeah, this will be, if you're listening to this, this will be the last of the horror month. I mean, I'll do horror movies any time of year, but more this year. So
Specifically
yeah,
for
so
October.
yeah, I have before this. I can remove this, but I Pan's Labyrinth is the next one, then The
Oh, okay, yeah.
Shining, Alien, and then this, and then Night of the Living Dead, and then this one.
Oh, dang, so you got a lot for
Yeah,
October.
this was like I squeezed in another one because I love this movie and I thought it'd be fun too. And I might release. I was gonna do Friday the 13th because there is the Friday the 13th this month, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't get a chance. I don't think there's much to talk about in that movie, to be honest.
I feel like most of those, like, all of those, like, Friday the 13th, Halloween, like, they're never really, like, substance in the movie, really. It's more just, like, the action is, like,
Yeah,
what
I did
people
a
like.
solo episode on Halloween, which was very weird, and I like brought in like Marxist theory. I feel like this was last Halloween, so there's some. There's like the white flight thing, like the white suburb thing. Anyway, I could just ramble and talk about recommend movies to everyone for a while, which maybe I should make an episode where I recommend movies, so like a top
Do
10.
like a tier list.
Oh, that's a good idea. I guess that could just be not an episode, but just like a video,
Yeah, like a TikTok.
short
Well, because
video.
you did, like, the 10 leftist movies, like, on
Yeah, I
Instagram.
have some more of those. I did like my top.
You've done so many.
Friday
Like,
the
me and
13th.
Mariah did one, and you're like, I'm taking that idea. And that's, like, all you post now.
Well, it was like it's easy, and then for the first couple, and then like shit. Now I don't know what to do for it's like the third one. So I
Yeah.
did like my top 5 Friday the 13th movies because there's like 12 of them, so you can do
Yeah.
the top 5 of them.
See, I, like, envy how easy it is to do, like, movie podcast episodes versus
I
than it
know.
is for our books. Because, like, me and Mariah are going to film an episode next week about a book that Mariah still hasn't finished yet.
It's
So,
much like,
Working on it.
and then the guy I don't know if you've been on an episode with, maybe not Rye, the guys who do the not turn leftist intervention podcast. They do like research episodes on American imperialism and things, and that takes a whole day just to write the script for those things. Like that's not
That's
to say
too much work.
Yeah, it's
I
a lot of
appreciate
work.
the work, but it's just not something that I can do. Meanwhile, we're reading just like I'm reading
Well, I can,
Ice Planet Barbarians.
we don't
Such a
script
dumb
any
bullshit.
episodes, but, like, our episodes are so chaotic. We go off on the craziest tangents.
Just like
And-
Kristen edits.
Yeah, I have to edit a lot. Like, we film. How long did we film for Ugly Love? And then we only ended up using like 45 minutes of
Over
it.
an hour.
Yeah, and I had to like cut it down so short.
Speaking of which, I need to get on reading Tender is the Flesh. I'm on page like 20.
I
started,
haven't
I'm
even
like,
got
all right.
mine in. I'm supposed to get mine in
I'm
tomorrow.
gonna go probably sit in bed and read that now.
I have a feeling that Evan will enjoy it for the most part. Kristen, I'm worried for you. I'm gonna be honest. You're gonna want to make Tyler read it. Or you're gonna read it out loud to him. It's
I did read. I
interesting.
read quotes of Haunting Adeline out to Tyler, and he was not very.
Is it any worse than that book? Things have gotten worse since we last spoke. That, like, short story?
significantly.
It's worse.
That
than
was a very short story. Yeah, I
What
read
is
a lot
that?
of splatter.
I'm actually pretty excited to read it. Then, I like reading these creepy.
I don't
horror
read
You
horror
like it? Eric
books.
LaRocca is like fruity. It's a nice like queer story. You should read. They're like
I bought the
talking
one that had
through
3 books, 3
email.
stories in it, right?
yeah.
That's the one.
I have this one. I have the trees grew because I bled there and you lost a lot of blood. They're all really good. But
Yeah, I
I didn't
don't
like
read
19
horror
Claws
books,
and
so-
a Blackbird.
Me and
I need
Mariah
to.
trying to find Halloween books for this month was rough. We're
Don't
doing.
read American Psycho.
I
You
was
can read
American.
Mother Maggot if you want.
It's too
Pick it
late
up
now.
now.
We've already picked out our books that we're doing for this month.
Evan, did you have any like closing thoughts you need to say before we like end the?
No, I don't. But I do want to I'll let you tell us about your podcast. I'll come back and do the little. I'll pretend that
Okay.
was.
That's the.
I was thinking of-
I mean, I might cut some of that, but I will keep some of the like recommendations. But I don't think I have anything left on the people under the stairs. But before we go, we should. I know we mentioned Kristen and Rye. You have a new podcast. I think you have 2 episodes out and some spooky Halloween episodes coming up.
We
do you want to give
will.
people? Well, I guess this
Yes.
might come out after those are released.
Coraline
But you can tell us about the
yeah.
podcast.
Well, I guess I depending on whenever you post this, Coraline will probably already be out, and Masters of Death maybe will already be out as well. So we'll probably be at like maybe like 6 episodes maybe by the time this is if this is getting posted the end of October.
Yeah, this is I think the day before, something like that. We got to
have
figure it out.
3 episodes out right now, I think, at the point of filming this. Yeah, because Coraline is 4. So you can.
Oh, I didn't listen to the. I didn't know you had a third one. I missed it.
We had Ugly Love.
Oh.
Colleen Hoover.
Oh, that's right. I did see that. I've read some other Colleen Hoover books.
It's a very short one.
It sucks.
There's not much substance to the book.
It's just a porn book, so don't read it. I'm very Mariah has me reading the worst books ever for this podcast.
We're here for the vibes. It gives you a lot of content, though, you know?
But I guess you can find our podcast at Literary Liberation, anywhere you get your podcast.
We're two Marxists who like to read lots
fiction.
Of things.
We read mostly
specifically
fiction.
For the podcast.
Yes.
We review fiction.
Novels.
Period.
Yeah, and you'll see the links below, but yeah, you can follow you on Instagram, TikTok,
Twitter, Spotify, Apple, wherever.
All on the internet, as I like to say.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you both, Kristen and Rye, for coming on and adding to Spooky October.
I guess you got to do an outro for the ending of October. If this is gonna be the last one.
It might be the last one. I don't know. I might put this in before because I feel like I want to do I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. But if I do, then I can always I can record myself doing something else at the end. But yeah, so you can listen to Left of the Projector. I almost said your podcast again. You can listen to both podcasts. Listen to both podcasts wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review. It's nice.
Only 1 star.
5 stars only.
Or 1 star.
5 stars. You can leave me a 1-star review if you really hate me. It's fine.
Or if you think
but
it's
if you really yeah, no 3s please. And we will